I'm Mary Bill, and we are in Freiburg, Maine, where I started flying when I was 47 years old in 1992. And I am now, after a career in aviation, mostly in seaplanes, I'm now back here as a chief flight instructor, chief pilot, and teaching people how to fly, which I love. This is the airplane that I recently introduced the Aviation Academy to, and we should have two of them. It's just a 172, but it's the perfect training airplane. When I was 45, I was working in an office in Massachusetts, and I knew there had to be something better for me to be doing. I had just finished a major project and had saved the supermarket chain $5 million a year, which I thought was a lot of money, but they probably make more than that in a day. But to me, that was a lot of money. And I couldn't see anything in the future that was going to be as challenging, other than just putting out fires for that project. So I had read somewhere that you have to give up everything that you're doing in order to find out who you are meant to be, because I did not have a clue. I had no idea whatsoever. So I took a leap of faith and left my job, gave up my company car, sold my house, and moved to Maine. And for a year, I backpacked and I hiked and I cross-country skied and I snowshoed. I did everything I could think of outdoors. And I was waiting for this inspiration to strike that wasn't striking. And then I started to get bored, and I thought, no, I can't give up on this. I know that something is going to happen. So one day, I went for a scenic flight. I was invited to go on a scenic flight, and I did that. And I thought, well, this is something I could get my teeth into. I needed to be challenged, and I needed to do something with my time other than just goofing off. I needed to be more focused. So after I got my instrument rating, I was done. That's all I really had planned on doing. And I was 50 at the time, so I was definitely done for sure. Way over the hill, I was certain. This fellow that used to come in every day for lunch, all the way from Portland, which is about a 20-minute flight, he said to me, "What are you going to do next, Mary?" I said, "I'm not going to do anything next, Charlie. I am done." He said, "Well, what about a commercial rating?" I said, "What on earth am I going to do with a commercial rating at 50 years old, Charlie?" And he said, "Well, you'd be a better pilot." And we all know, as pilots, that when you get another rating, you become a better pilot. But I thought he meant I wasn't a good pilot. So I said, I am too a good pilot to myself. I didn't tell him that. So I came back from Portland in 2 weeks with a commercial rating. I said, so there, to myself. So Charlie said, "Well, what are you going to do next?" I said, "Charlie, really and truly, you have to leave me alone." He said, "Well, what about a seaplane rating?" "Oh," I said, "that's what I wanted to do in the first place. Where can I go?" So I started flying. I had a fifth ownership in an Archer at the time, and I flew from Freiburg over to Turner as many days as I could get there, and they would have space for me. And I came back with a commercial seaplane rating, which I didn't anticipate. But once you have a commercial rating, everything you add after that becomes a commercial license. So after that, I decided that I really needed to start having money coming in the other direction. And if I had a commercial seaplane rating, then I must be able to get a job. So then everything in aviation has been like this. An airplane became available. I didn't know who to talk to about this airplane because I didn't know who to trust. Everybody that was giving me information had, in my mind, had something to gain. And I knew nothing about buying an airplane. I knew nothing about floats. I knew nothing about changing it from floats to wheels. And my mechanic could see my concern, and he recommended a man in Naples who could be my mentor. He said he's undoubtedly the best seaplane pilot in the state of Maine. He knows the most about general aviation because he buys and sells it all the time. And I think he'll help you. He'll be a little grouchy, but I think he'll help you. So I couldn't remember his name, but he came over and he looked at the airplane and he said, "Mary, that's a good buy." And The maintenance has been done right there in Freiburg. You really should buy it. If you're interested in a seaplane, this would be a good plane for you. So I bought the airplane, and then a lease became available. The seaplane base over in Naples, and I went over there to ask for a job, and they had just hired someone. And then the insurance company required me to have 50 hours on floats, which makes certain, it makes perfect sense. And so I just started flying around Maine for the rest of that season. They called the next year and said that the owners they had just taken over the lease. These two people had just taken over the lease, but they didn't fly it. They had to hire someone to fly it, and they couldn't make any money that way. So they asked me if I was interested in purchasing the lease, and I said, no, I'm not interested. I didn't even think about it. I'm not interested in purchasing it because, number one, I don't know if I want to do scenic flights. I did have a Part 135, so I thought that that would be a good place to operate out of that. And I said, I don't know if I want to work 7 days a week or if I can physically work 7 days a week. So they said, okay, fine. And that was the end of that conversation. So the next day, they called me back. And so, I said I would, in reference to the lease, I said I'd be interested in an option to buy for a year because I didn't know if I wanted to do scenic flights or if I could do them 7 days a week or anything about it. And that's when they said no. They weren't interested in that. But when they called back the next day, they said, you've got a deal. And I said, okay, fine. And so when I was working in an office, I couldn't wait for Friday. I couldn't wait for 5 o'clock. I couldn't wait for holidays. I couldn't wait for vacations and wanted to extend those as long as possible. But when I was working at the seaplane base, 7 days a week, as long as I could fly during the day, I could not wait to get to work. I could not wait to get to work, and I would only come home because I was exhausted. So because I had a Part 135, I had to go for a check ride with the FAA once a year. It was very beneficial for both of us because I knew more about seaplane flying than they did, and of course they always had something more to offer to me because they had more experience. So it was a wonderful working relationship that I had with each one of the inspectors. So John Wood came one time and he said, Mary, we would like you to become an instructor. Oh, I said, no, John. Thank you just the same, but I have enough ratings. I'm really not interested in being an instructor. And he said, oh, well, I'd really like you to be an instructor. We would like you to be an instructor because we need a place to come and stay current. And we like the way that you take care of your equipment. So I said, yeah, I'm really sorry. When I was 23, I was really pretty lost at that time. I had absolutely no self-confidence whatsoever. I had a 3-year-old child, and we were canoeing down the North River, and I saw my first seaplane. There's a wonderful description of that in my book, but I'm not going to go into that right now. I'd love to read that section to you, and I frequently do when I talk. But this man had a seaplane in his backyard. He came out of the house, got in his seaplane, and then took off. And I thought, what a sense of freedom that would be. That would be just wonderful. But I had absolutely no idea that I could possibly do something like that. I couldn't even think about being a pilot, never mind a seaplane pilot. And 7 years later, I went for a scenic flight with my daughter Lisa on floats. And at the time, I was thinking that I wanted to do something different, and I could see a need in the office and for people to have transportation. But I didn't think any more of it. But I thought, I could do this. So that's when I wanted to be a commercial seaplane pilot. And that's when I was 30. However, I looked into it 3 different times, and everybody told me that I had to get a land rating first. And I was terrified to go to an airport. And I thought, what on earth am I going to do with a land rating? Oh, my goodness, I would never use a land rating. And I didn't belong at an airport, I was sure. And unfortunately, that's a common feeling for a lot of people, even today. And so I looked into it the 3 different times, and I couldn't do it. My kids were little. They were interested in outside activities, and I couldn't afford it at the time. So I did not follow through with it then. So before I even started at the seaplane base in Naples, I had a Part 135. So when I was on my first charter flight, I climbed out on my way to northern Maine, and I thought, oh my gosh, I have actually reached a goal without consciously going after it, which was the best way for me to learn. If I had a goal and had to do it in a certain amount of time and had to do this and had to do that, I would not have enjoyed it anywhere near as much as I did. So I promised myself right then that whenever anybody asked me to do something in aviation, I would never refuse it because aviation was so important to me at that time, for sure. So the day after John Wood asked me to be a flight instructor, I realized that I didn't follow through with my own promise. So I called John and I said, "Okay, John, I'll get a CFI." So I went down that winter. I went down to Long Island, and it was at American Flyers, and they did the double I first. And I thought, what on earth am I going to do with a double I? I don't need a double I, but that's the way they do it. And I promised myself that I would go along with this, and so I got the double I first. And then I went back and got the CFI that winter. But I had absolutely no idea that I would like to be a teacher. My idea of a teacher was somebody standing up in the front of the room in high school with a whole bunch of teenagers that didn't want to be there, because I certainly didn't want to be there. And so I never even thought any further about it. But teaching people how to fly a seaplane was a different story entirely. So after 4 years of doing scenic flights, which I loved, I decided I wanted to spend more time teaching, and I couldn't do both and the charter flying. I couldn't do all three of those things at that seaplane base. And so I went over to the Brandy Pond, actually Jim, who eventually became my husband, and I went over to Brandy Pond and started the seaplane base over there, where I started my own flight school, and I ran that for 16 years. It was just wonderful. My first office over there was a little boys' camp that Jim had brought down for me. It didn't have any electricity. It didn't have any heat, of course. It didn't have a telephone, and it was absolutely the best office I ever had. Loved it. I've had many flying experiences that I've enjoyed tremendously. Air racing, the first time I air raced, was an unbelievably wonderful experience. Flying on floats was always wonderful. I could go everywhere I wanted to go, especially in the state of Maine, and learn so much about Maine. But with ski flying, I didn't teach, and so that was just fun. And every weekend, it wasn't a matter of if we were going to fly, it was where were we going. And there were 4 or 5 airplanes that we always gathered together, and we'd leave in the morning, and we would go to northern Maine. We'd go up to Chesuncook sometimes for lunch, and we'd land on Chesuncook Lake, and one of the young men would come down with a snow machine and a long trailer, and we'd all stand on the trailer and hold on to the iron railings along the side, and he'd take us up to the restaurant. I've flown to Alaska 4 times, and that really and truly is a spectacular flight, going up through the mountains. Well, first of all, seeing this country all the way across the country, and then going through the mountains in the western Canada. But one time, really and truly was the one time that I feel I was the closest to death in an airplane. The ceiling was 1,500 feet, and I spoke to the flight service. There's a flight service at every airport along the way in Canada. And I said, is this a normal weather briefing for this time of year? Because it was in July. And he said, it is. And I said, how long has the ceiling been like this? He said, for 2 weeks. And I said, have other pilots been going up and through it, underneath it, successfully? And he said, yes. Now, a little bit of information, they don't want you to go directly from VOR to VOR or airport to airport, because it's just over these rigid peaks of all of the mountains. There are no roads, no houses, no cabins. There's no habitation. So number one, you would be very unlikely to survive if you landed in those mountains. Number two, they would have a hard time finding you. We didn't have ADSB at the time. And number three, how are they going to get you out of there? So they want you to go over the Alcan Highway, which is what I always did. So I was flying along the Alcan Highway, but I had 2 other airplanes with me, and neither one of them were IFR. So if I had my druthers, I would have waited for the next day to see if the weather was going to be better. And if it wasn't, I could fly IFR, get on top and go where I wanted to go. But neither one of these pilots could. So we started to go below it. They all agreed that that was fine with them. Well, I wasn't 10 minutes or 15 minutes away from the airport, and the clouds just came down and circled me completely. I was, 1,000 feet, and in between mountains that I couldn't see any longer. Couldn't follow the road because the GPS was screaming terrain, 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 and I had a hard time trying to fly and keep the GPS quiet and go where I needed to go. All I wanted to do was just stay over the road so I could climb and get above it. I couldn't turn around because they were right behind me. One of them was confused. Should I turn left or should I turn right? And nobody was answering her. She kept asking. She kept asking. So I just climbed and I thought, dear God, I'm either going to make it or I'm not. There's just no two ways about this. So obviously I did make it. I did get up, but I got up to 9,000 feet, which was the legal IFR altitude to be at. But I also had IFR and VFR plates, because I just always did. I always traveled with both in case I needed them, and approach plates. So I knew what the minimum safe altitude was for VFR, and that was 8,000. But I was picking up ice at 9,000. So I told the air traffic controller, I'm going down to 8,000. He said, you can't go down to 8,000. I said, I'm going down to 8,000 because I'm picking up ice and I can't control it. I have no way to control it. He said, you can't go down to 8,000. I said, I'm going. I know that that's a minimum safe altitude. So he said, we won't be able to pick you up on radar. So when I reached the next airport, I had the best therapy for me is cleaning an airplane when I land. And so that's exactly what I was doing, getting all the bugs off that I was picking up when I was low. And of course, I had called in and canceled my flight plan. And the briefer said, Mary, we are so sorry that happened. I said, it's not your fault. You gave me the best information that you had accessible to you. I said, but we made it. Between the two of us, we got through this, and so I'm fine. There's a low system that sits outside over the ocean that's apt to sit there for days. And you never would know when that's going to move in over that highway. And what happens in Alaska is they don't have any radar, so they have no forecasting capability. They had no idea that was moving in because of the mountain, because of the heights of the mountains. It interferes with the radar. The other two pilots ended up turning around successfully and landing, and they did continue the flight the next day. That's an interesting question to ask me, is what I like about being a 99. First of all, when I was at Freiburg, I never saw another female pilot. I thought I was the only one. And when I went to my first section meeting that was in Kennebunkport, I was greeted by all women. And I found that I could race, which is what I really wanted to do when I started flying. And somebody said, I'll be your mother bird and I'll help you. And it was very exciting. So once I had the opportunity to get into air racing, I raced once, and then I was asked to judge after that. And that was just a different level of women that I was working with. They owned their own businesses. They loved to fly, and they were all very competitive and very, very smart, very, very smart. And I really enjoyed their company tremendously. I also loved working with the Katahdin Wings and keeping them going. And I worked, at different positions at the chapter level and then different positions at a section level. But being governor is the one I enjoyed the most because I really like being a leader. I enjoy that very much. I have recently written a book, but I've been asked, why did you write a book? Well, when I was doing scenic flights, people would immediately ask me, how did you ever get into flying? Or why did you ever get into seaplane flying? And when I told them my story of how I got into it, they said, oh, you should write a book. Well, I never even considered it because I wanted to be outside. And the thoughts of sitting down every day to write a book was beyond me. I wouldn't even consider it. However, After the seaplane base closed, after I had been there for 16 years and a total of 20 years in the seaplane industry, I reached out for a writing coach. And she wouldn't let me just write about flying. I had to talk about my story. And so I started writing and writing. And after 7 years, putting that whole story together, I did come up with a book. As you can see, the title of the book is Finding Myself in Aviation. And at the top, it says, it's never too late to do what you love. That's my theory. But now that I'm 80, and I've had all of these wonderful experiences, I've truly, truly had a wonderful journey in aviation. I just cannot say what a difference it has made in my life for many reasons. But I'm 80 now, and I have 4 instructors that work. We all work together as a team. And as the chief flight instructor, I don't want to take their students away because they're building time and they're going to be going places with their aviation careers, as I did. And it's all about time and experience. So I can supervise them, and I can supervise the maintenance on the airplanes just fine. I have no problem with that. But I am also doing scenic angel flights and PALS flights, which are patient airlift service. And I have an opportunity to do those about once a week, or at least once every other week in a 206. And I love doing those. I love doing them and helping the pilot whenever he needs any help. And I continue to work the radios. I am very grateful for all of the years that I've had an experience in aviation. It's time for me to give back. It's time for me to do these angel flights. It's all volunteer work, and we all need to give back. We all need to volunteer. I went to a section meeting one time, and somebody said, I was told we shouldn't volunteer. How could you be a 99 and not volunteer? That's our basis of existence. We need to do that, and I love it. I love it. It's not all about making money. It's never all been about making money. And because of that, I have made money. I'm not just after the almighty book. I am extraordinarily grateful for all of these experiences and hope that other people have the opportunity to experience. It doesn't have to be just aviation. You can enjoy anything. Put sailing in that word of aviation and make a career of that, or anything that you want to do. It's so rewarding to be able to do what you love to do.